Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. There's certainly a lot of you that have signed up to attend. So at the last count yesterday morning, there were 487 registered attendees. So it's really great to see so many of you here and more are joining as we go, I think. So that's really, really great. One of the good things about the pandemic is that we're able to run events like this and get so many of you in the same Zoom. To try and do the same in a physical location with the numbers that we've got registered today and with social distancing, we'd need to have hired Wembley Stadium or something, and our budget just wouldn't have allowed for that. And I wouldn't have been able to wear my slippers either. So I'm really glad that we're here instead. So what we'll do today is take a deep dive in our attempts to best understand 2022 undergraduate applicants, or as they've been referred to here and elsewhere, the Covid cohort. Before we kick off, let's just do a bit of very quick housekeeping. So if you have any tech issues or general queries, please use the chat box for this, and our lovely marketing team, Carly and Katie, will try and troubleshoot for you. For any questions about the research or anything else that you'd like to know, please use the Q&A and we will pick them up at the end. If there's anything that we can't get to in this session, then we can discuss with you separately afterwards, so either Babs or myself. Or of course, your TSR account managers are on hand too, should you want to explore anything further. And we really hope that you do. You know, there's certainly lots to absorb in the next 60 minutes. And 60 minutes is a lot of talking from Babs and myself, so we'll run a few polls throughout, just to give our voices a short break, but also because we'd really love to hear your thoughts and understand your plans and challenges too, as we go through the research. So some quick introductions before we get into the good stuff. I'm Victoria Littler. I joined TSR fairly recently, so just back in March this year as Senior Account Director, and I'm responsible for a team of account managers who help support most of you attending here today with marketing campaigns and strategy to engage with our audience on TSR. I've worked within HE for 6 years now, leading commercial brand partnerships for NUS for the most part, and also have experience with the private sector and within agencies. Big focus of my role at TSR is working alongside Barbara to promote our Insight division as we continue to support more and more institutions to make insightful data-led decisions on their marketing creative, their overall recruitment strategy, and just to better understand the student mindset in a much more meaningful way. Over to you, Babs.
Hello there, my name is Barbara Bradshaw and I'm the Senior Market Research Consultant at the Student Room. My background is in Research and Insight, and I joined TSR about 2.5 years ago. Prior to that, I worked in a university market research and insight team for about 12 years. And my role at TSR, I'm responsible for the research and insight offered to our clients. And I also conduct our internal research for the Student Room, including the Navigating Changing Options tracking research, which is where our research findings come from today.
Thanks, Bab. So for the agenda for today, we'll explain a bit about what we did and why we did it. I'll give some context about what was happening in the wider world at each of the 4 stages of the research. Then we'll move on to the findings, starting with some tracking information that looks at changes over time. Then we'll look at findings from the latest wave of research before looking to the future to see what actions your institution could take now to help support these students navigate the coming months. And finally, summarising with some key takeaways and then any questions that you might have. Over to you, Babs.
Thank you. I'll just briefly explain the research methodology. So Navigating Changing Options is the Student Room's regular quantitative survey, which is open to registered members of the community and visitors to the site, and 75% of UK students visit TSR. So it's a large-scale online tracking study. We set it up initially at the start of the pandemic last year to explore how our community was coping and the impact of the changes to the recruitment cycle. At the time, we expected to repeat the research in the summer and maybe even into the autumn term if we still needed to. And so far, we've now had 4 waves of the research and we plan to continue into the next academic year. For MRS compliance, we screen out those aged under 16. And for this research, we concentrate on our UK audience. This means we get responses from year 11s right through to current students. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're focusing on the 2022 cohort. When we started this research, they were in year 11 and they just rather abruptly finished secondary school. So 1 year on, and this cohort are now in year 12 and just starting out on their university research. So the first wave of the research was in April 2020. Wave 2 was in June when this cohort were waiting to receive their GCSE results. Wave 3 was October, and the 2022 cohort had just started year 12, and our most recent wave of research was in March this year, spring term of year 12. The next wave is planned for the summer term and then into the next academic year, tracking this cohort throughout their decision-making journey. I'm now just going to hand over to Victoria, who's going to provide some wider context to set the scene.
Thanks, Babs. So in a year where there's been immense change, while at the same time very little has happened in the lives of many, we thought it would be useful to just quickly recap what was happening in the UK while the surveys were live. So our research began right at the start of April 2020, back when we all had meetings in the diary that hadn't yet been cancelled, and holidays that were booked and we were still hoping to take. The 2022 cohort were in year 11 and rainbows were everywhere. This one here is actually Barbara's son's handiwork, and I'm sure you'll all agree it is a masterpiece. My own daughter was just 2 at this point, so our attempts ended up a big mash of all the colours, so it was actually just very brown in the end, but I did still put it in our living room window. In the main news, the UK had locked down, GCSEs were cancelled, and the 2022 cohort had just 2 days notice that their high school years were over. While the survey was live, Captain Sir Tom Moore was walking laps of his garden. Boris Johnson, after all of his handshaking, was admitted to intensive care and then discharged. Families around the world were tuning into PE with Joe. Quite a few sweaty parents there, myself included, trying to keep up. And the plan for centre assessed grades for GCSE students was announced. Wave 2 of the research was a couple of months later in June. The 2022 cohort were awaiting their GCSE results and lockdown 1 was easing. In the main news, Test and Trace was launched as the 10th and final clap for carers. Schools were in the process of submitting their centre assessed grades. And then while the survey was live, anti-racism demonstrations were happening around the world, support bubbles were introduced and non-essential retailers were allowed to reopen. For the next wave, in October, our year 11s were no longer year 11s. They've now started year 12 and they were back in the classroom. So we'd had A-level results day, the algorithm and the fallout that had caused across our sector, GCSE results determined by centre assessed grades, and the country had spent the summer eating out to help out. While the survey was live, nationwide tier regulations came into force. There was the uncertainty regarding and public debate regarding free school meals funding over the half-term holidays, frustrating for many after Marcus Rashford had so successfully lobbied the government to provide vouchers for disadvantaged families over the summer. And UK universities faced criticism about the cost and quality of food parcels for self-isolating students. And at this point, we're still weeks away from a vaccine announcement. So then we have Christmas, we have the start of 2021, and the most recent wave of our research was conducted in March this year. The 2022 cohort were in the spring term of year 12, remote learning for most, and sadly no rainbows this time. In the main news, vaccinations were well underway. There's a lot of misinformation, confusion about safety and what this meant, which took up a lot of media coverage, especially on social. New variants were identified and lockdown 3 was in progress. While the survey was live, schools and colleges returned to classroom learning, reclaimed the streets protests after the tragic killing of Sarah Everard sparked a national movement around women's safety in public, and 24.2 million had received their first vaccination. So, of course, we know all of this, but when you see it in a timeline of events like this over just a handful of PowerPoint slides, it still feels somewhat unbelievable that all this happened and changed our lives in such a relatively short time. So huge turbulence for us all, but particularly for young people trying to navigate all of these changes while staying motivated and supported in their learning and making decisions for their futures. So we'll pause here and have a quick poll. And this first one, just to get us going, is a bit lighthearted while we test the tech and just make sure that you're all still with us. Often the fear of webinar presenters is anyone still here, or am I just talking out loud to my laptop in my dining room? So the poll's just up there on the screen, so thanks Carly and Katie for that. So in honour of Captain Sir Tom Moore, Dame Judi Dench is taking part in the hashtag Captain Tom 100 challenge, but what is she doing? So let's see some votes coming in. Okay, and the results are in. So, interestingly, most of you thought that Dame Judi Dench is performing 100 lines of Macbeth. but I can reveal that she's actually eating 100 Maltesers. So a valiant effort for sure from Dame Judy, but 100 Maltesers is just a regular afternoon snack for me. So anyway, moving on, and over to you, Babs.
Thank you. I'll just move on now to the tracking findings. So in April 2020, there was little confidence amongst these students that they would get the GCSE grades they deserved. Only 44% were confident, including just 5% who were very confident. By June 2020, we saw that there was uncertainty in how GCSE grades would be calculated. Just 45% felt that they understood this. But more positively, in October 2020, 63% of respondents reported that they had received the grades they deserved, and 80% said overall they were happy with their results. However, missing GCSE exams has led to concerns about future exam performance. In the most recent wave of our research, this cohort were facing the reality of preparing for their first formal exams since their SATs. And this quote is from a student. "I feel very frightened about having to sit my A-level exams next year, knowing I've never sat a real exam before." And as these Year 12 students find themselves researching their higher education options, they're also having to negotiate worries that previous cohorts haven't had to contend with. Struggling to motivate themselves to work was a key concern, as was catching up from lost teaching time and the impact that all of this will have on their grades. And in relation to their university applications, missing work experience opportunities was a concern, particularly for those interested in clinical courses. Missing face-to-face university open days, missing extracurricular opportunities to put on their personal statements, and missing UCAS and HE fairs to find out about universities were all concerns. And these concerns had intensified as Year 12 progressed. So comparing the start of Year 12 in October 2020, when most teaching was in the classroom, to the latest wave of research in March 2021 during lockdown 3, the reality of lost teaching time and the potential impact on their grades had become more apparent and more of a concern. Similarly, a higher proportion were concerned about cramming in extra study and coursework, and having to motivate themselves had also increased as a concern over this period. Whereas, quite understandably, in the midst of lockdown 3, concerns about future lockdowns and about catching COVID had declined. And while many of the comments and concerns that these young people faced related to their education and university applications, the realities of COVID were also pressing. Parents and family members furloughed or out of work, concern about critically vulnerable people in their lives, plus in some cases coping with the loss of family members or friends due to COVID, whilst also negotiating a new course of study being taught in a new and on-trial way of learning. So another quote from a student here. "If I stay in school any longer than necessary and attend that revision session, am I more likely to kill my grandparents?" So no other cohort has ever had to worry about that before. So while for many of us, a year into the pandemic, we've learned new ways to communicate with our friends and colleagues, communicating online for school and social interactions has increasingly become the norm. However, this cohort were feeling less connected now than they did in lockdown 1. The proportion who agreed that they knew how to connect with classmates remotely had declined from 80% at the start of the pandemic to just 56% at this stage. The proportion who had a support network to reach out to had declined from 65% to 58%. And the proportion who felt able to cope with the uncertainty had fallen from 51% to just 40%. This cohort has moved from secondary school to sixth form, starting a new course of study, perhaps in a different setting and with a different set of friends and classmates. They had just one term to meet and make new friends before going into lockdown 3. So it's unsurprising that they may not know how to connect so easily with their classmates remotely. And the impact on mental health has been significant. 61% described their pre-COVID mental health as good or very good usually, but this has declined at each stage of our research. By wave 4, just 1 in 5 described their mental health as good or very good. And across the TSR site in the 2 weeks that the wave 4 survey was live, we had over 4,000 posts from more than 2,000 unique posters mentioning stress, anxiety, or worry. Perhaps unsurprisingly, alongside the declining mental health of these young people, motivation is low. Literally everyone I know hates school and their current subjects now. It's like watching their passion for learning just slowly die. So what has been the impact on their future and on their university plans? The next slides concentrate on the latest wave of the research, which was March 2021, spring term of Year 12, and a time when traditionally we would have seen the more focused Year 12s starting to think about their subjects and universities in advance of the summer open day season. And I focused on some of the questions our university clients have been asking us. So, has COVID-19 impacted the choice of subject for 2022 applicants? Well, maybe not as much as we would have thought. 64% said it hadn't, but that still leaves over a third for whom it had impacted their choice, or they were unsure whether it would. There were some groups who were more likely to say that their subject choice had been impacted. So those predicted AAB to BBB were more likely to say their subject choice was affected compared to those predicted the highest grades of AAA and above. And those who were the first generation in their family to go to university were more likely to have changed their subject than those whose parents had been to university. The reasons for changing their subjects were similar to the concerns we mentioned earlier. So a lack of relevant work experience opportunities. So this has led to students being concerned about applying to courses where work experience is an entry requirement. It also means students haven't had the chance to sort of try before they buy for some subjects. And in some cases, students were avoiding courses where work placements are mandatory due to concerns that these wouldn't happen. There was a lack of access to careers advice in schools and colleges, and a lack of career and HE fairs to find out about the different career options open to them. And there was a lack of confidence that they'll get the grades required for the courses they originally considered due to lost teaching time and low motivation. There was a lack of motivation in general and a lack of confidence that they could motivate themselves in future to undertake high pressure courses or careers. Some were choosing courses where they were more likely to lead to secure employment in the future. So for some, it was unclear whether their chosen industries would even survive COVID. For others, this was about choosing courses which lead directly to careers in what they perceive to be secure fields, so for example, health. But positively, others had found lockdown had given them increased time to consider and reflect on their choices and choose courses that they really wanted to study. So I've just added some quotes here and I'll catch my breath for a minute while you read them. So, it's made me realise I lack the motivation and the self-confidence to go into certain industries. I should try and find employment opportunities that aren't as intense. I haven't been able to meet with my careers teacher, so I'm not completely sure of the career options I would have. I want to be sure I choose a degree that gives me a high chance of employment rather than a degree I like, but that doesn't lead to a stable career. I need to go with a safer option. I was considering law, but without the work experience opportunities, English was less risky. And also, it's given me more time to realise what I want and what job I want. In line with some of those comments, employability after they graduate was a concern, significantly heightened by COVID. 68% were quite or very concerned about getting a job after they graduate, and that included 32% who were very concerned. Pre-COVID, only half as many were concerned, just 8% were very concerned. And again, some student quotes here. COVID-19 has made me feel as if all the doors are closed on us. Students are at breaking point. It's so hard to look into future careers with this going on. So has COVID-19 impacted choice of university for 2022 applicants? Again, I'd probably say not as much as we may initially have been concerned about. 59% of the audience said no. For 13%, yes, it had. And perhaps understandably at this early stage, 29% were still unsure. Male respondents were more likely than female respondents to say no, their choice would be unaffected, and female respondents were more likely to be unsure. And for those who said their uni choice was affected, the reasons for this were again tied to confidence and motivation. So they lacked the confidence that they would get the grades required for the universities they originally considered. They lacked the motivation to apply for universities with high entry requirements and where the perception that courses themselves would be more intense. There was a desire to be closer to home in case of future lockdowns, so they could get home easily if required. They hadn't had the opportunities to visit different universities to explore their options. And some mentioned changing the universities they were considering in response to how those universities had handled the pandemic and their treatment of current students. So again, I've got some student quotes here, and I'll just read a couple. This has made me realise that I'm not capable of achieving top grades and I should aim for something lower. I don't think I'll travel to a uni outside London, as the travel home fiasco that occurred with uni students when COVID hit was very bad. My grades have dropped because of online learning, and some of the universities I considered have dealt with this pandemic in a terrible way and treated students poorly. I've decided not to attend those universities. Another question we've been asked by universities: are 2022 applicants more likely to want to stay at home for university? Well, for most, their plans hadn't changed. 1 in 10 were more interested in staying at home. Almost double that figure were more interested in moving away. And it's still early days for these students in their application cycle. Respondents who were the first generation to go to university were more likely to have changed their plans. Just 64% said it hadn't changed, compared to 77% of those whose parents had been to university. And while a higher proportion planned to stay at home compared to those whose parents went to university, we also actually saw a higher proportion say they now wanted to move away. And one theme that we really noticed within the open comments was that COVID wasn't necessarily prompting the 2022 cohort to stay at home for university, but it was about choosing a university that was close enough to home to get home quickly if they needed to. 71% of those planning to move away for university said their ideal university was within 3 hours of home. I'm just going to hand over now to Victoria for a quick poll.
Great, thank you, Babs. Okay, so we're talking here about 2022 applicants, of course, but bringing our attention to the present for a moment, we'd love to know, when it comes to your 2021 tracking and applicant pipeline, have you noticed a change to your local recruitment? And we've got the poll up on the screen there. Thank you, Carly and Katie. Okay, I think some votes are coming in. Okay, and we've got the results. So yeah, nearly half of you saying there's been no noticeable difference. 36% it's increased. So your local recruitment's increased for this year, and 15% saying it's decreased. So that's really interesting. Thank you for joining in. Matches well with some of the conversations we're having with a lot of you across the board, particularly for those of you seeing a decline in EU applicants at the moment. That local recruitment pool is competitive right now, for sure. Thanks, and back to you, Babs.
So are parents or carers having an influence? For more than half of respondents, yes, they were, whereas 45% said their parents, carers or guardians weren't influencing their decision making. Among those whose parents were influencing choice, there was a clear trend for parents to be encouraging their children to consider options closer to home or stay at home. Although if you look at the bottom of this chart, when it comes to deferring university, a higher proportion, 14%, said their parents were encouraging them not to defer, compared to just 6% whose parents were encouraging them to take a gap year. And there were some differences by student type. So among those who were planning to stay at home for university, parental influence seemed to be greater. 2/3 of those planning to stay at home said their parents were influencing those decisions. And again, in profile, there were some differences. So 22% of first in family respondents said their parents were encouraging them to stay at home, compared to 13% of those whose parents had been to uni. And 25% of those receiving free school meals said their parents were encouraging them to stay at home, versus 16% of those who didn't receive free school meals. And now moving on to researching universities. So at this stage in the university application cycle, we'd normally be seeing year 12 starting to think about subjects in universities, while universities would be gearing up for their summer open days. So how are they researching universities now? Most of the research was conducted online, understandably. The UCAS website and Google were the key resources. University virtual open days feature highly, with 55% using or planning to use them. Online forums, league tables and comparison sites were also high on the list. First in family respondents used fewer information sources in general, using on average 5 each, versus those whose parents had been to uni, who selected 6 sources each. And what about virtual open days? So 41% of these year 12 respondents had already attended a virtual open day, and very positively, 81% of those who attended had found the virtual open day they attended useful. And that's just amazing when you think about it. So having to move online open days has enabled this cohort to start engaging with and interacting with universities earlier than they may have done so previously. And what's important is that these interactions, on the most part, have been really positive. So that's a really great message for recruitment teams and anyone else involved in online open days. Victoria's got another poll now.
Thanks, Babs. And just before we get to the poll, I just wanted to echo how great that number is, and hope that many of you feel really reassured by that. You know, last year was a real struggle to online across the sector. We've nailed, but with 81% of students here saying really positive things about their experience so far, you should feel incredibly proud that you're doing a really, really good job. So yeah, hats off. Can you load the poll now, please, Carly? Thank you. So what does your plan for summer open days currently look like? We'd really like to know, are you planning on campus, in-person open days, restrictions allowing? Are you sticking with virtual open days for this year again, or are you looking to do a hybrid of the two? Okay, we've got some results coming in. Okay, so we've got 5% are planning to do on campus. That's really, really interesting. Most of you, so 55% are sticking with virtual open days, and 41% are looking to do a hybrid of the two. Yeah, thanks again for participating. Really glad to see that you're still with us. A lot of my team currently are working with institutions on plans to promote virtual still. It's encouraging to see that there are some plans to offer on campus. It's in a sort of hybrid way, and you'll see why on the next few slides. So back to you, Babs.
Thanks. I just noticed a question in the chat about whether the differences that I mentioned are statistically significant. Yes, they are. If I've highlighted a difference, it is a statistical difference, statistically significant difference. Okay, so does this cohort want to attend virtual or in-person open days in the summer? Yes, they do. 85% were still planning to attend a virtual open day. 76% plan to attend an on-campus open day if restrictions allow. And in total, 71% plan to attend both. So the things that this cohort at the beginning of their decision-making journey wanted from virtual open days were the same as we'd expect to see for a face-to-face event. So specific information about the course, taster lectures to see what the teaching would be like, opportunities to meet lecturers and current students, and the ability to ask questions, but also an option to watch on-demand content in their own time rather than turning up live. And in terms of general information that they wanted from universities now, the key things they wanted to know from universities at this stage hasn't changed versus what they would have expected, or what we would have expected to see pre-COVID, and it's course information, which was the priority for most. This was followed by guidance on applications and personal statements. And this is a particular concern because these young people are more limited in work experience and volunteering opportunities, but also hobbies and interests that they can call on to include in their personal statements. Also high on the list was information about whether universities would be flexible with their entry requirements and work experience requirements in light of COVID-19. So whether any allowances will be made when they're applying. And this was a theme that we saw repeatedly in the open comments, that this cohort are really worried that if things do go back to normal, their exams and assessments will carry on as normal with no allowances made for the disruption that they've had to face due to lockdown. So I'm scared we'll have to sit A-levels as if nothing happened. I hope they either cancel 2022 A-levels completely, or at least significantly cut down in content to make up for the lessons we've missed and take into account the major decrease in motivation and mental health. I'll just hand back to Victoria.
Thanks, Fab. So we've done a lot of looking backwards here, importantly so, and I think some of the findings, particularly, you know, when we hear those quotes direct from students, they're quite hard to hear. You know, it really gives sort of a good insight into how they're really thinking and feeling. So we've done a lot of looking backwards, but what about the future? We asked respondents what they were most looking forward to when the vaccine rollout is complete and it's safe to properly socialise again. And as we may expect, meeting up with family and friends, travelling, meals out and in-person celebrations topped the post-lockdown to-do list. It's really important to note here that more than 3 in 5 have said that visiting universities in person was among the things they most wanted to do. So as we think again about summer open days, how best can these be organised so that students are getting to see your institution and everything it offers, but in a safe way and in line with any restrictions. And lockdown wasn't all bad. We asked if there were any positive aspects that they would like to maintain when restrictions are eased, and 96% wanted to maintain some elements of their lockdown lives. It's really positive to me, that, because it shows that despite the chaos and the trauma of the last year, there's still been a lot of opportunity which students feel good about. But what it also says very clearly is that as a sector, we can't expect a return to the old normal, because that isn't what students want a wholesale return to. On average, each respondent selected 4.5 aspects of lockdown that they wanted to maintain. And the options with the most mentions were around maintaining the flexibility that their independent and online learning has given them. So 57% wanted the flexibility to work or study at a time that suits them. 50% wanted the flexibility to work or study from home. And 2/5, so 41% there, wanted to continue studying more independently. So just to finish this section on positive, for some, the lockdown has given them more time to reflect and research universities. And I would say this is reflected in the proportion of the 2022 cohort who have already attended virtual open days. An upside for students is that they're now spending more time in their decision making. But we know that this is causing some universities concern in offer holders taking more time to commit when it comes to their 2021 applicant pipeline. Usually year on year, it would be around now that most offers are accepted, but got another month and a half to make their decisions. So this explains any lull that you might be seeing in your CRM. But keep speaking to them, keep engaging with them. Even for those of you with a healthy looking applicant pipeline, there's still some time to go where they could choose another institution over yours. So, what content are you putting out there? Based on everything we've talked about this morning, what messaging could you use to give students confidence, help build up their energy, give them some motivation, and convince them that you're the right choice for them to help them reach their future potential? This extra time that students are taking to research and make their decisions might well be a trend that continues into next year, as this 2022 cohort definitely want to take more time and do even more research, and over a much longer period of time than we'd come to traditionally expect. As we've seen from the research, students want to go and see places in real life if they can, because they may have only ever seen their choices online up until now. Some may be taking the time to do road trips in the May half term and go and see some places, even if it's just to do a quick walk around. For those who can do so safely and logistically, a physical open day is a really good shout to try and gently encourage students to confirm their offers pre-clearing the 2021 applicants, and to give the 2022 cohort a really solid understanding of everything a place with you has to offer while they're doing their early stage research. So in terms of some key takeaways and what this means for you, the 2022 cohort are keen to visit university in person, as we've said, and they still want virtual open days. So that can seem a bit contradictory, might be a bit confusing, but what it means for you is just giving students choice where you can. So if you can plan and host a physical open day, then you probably should, but continue to focus on providing an online alternative too for those who need it. Some great examples I'm hearing about across the sector are hosting online events over a longer period, so more like an open month. So students can drop in and hear the bits that are most important to them, rather than being expected to sit on a Zoom call for 8 hours. So give students the choice and communicate that choice as clearly and consistently as possible. So point 2, as we've seen in the research, lack of communication and access to information has hit students really hard this last year. So when thinking about your comms plan and strategy, it's important to put an emphasis on brand level comms. So your above the line marketing that talks to really focus on course specific information and that granular detail that we know students have been struggling to find. The traffic we're seeing on TSR this year shows a change in search behaviour as well, with higher numbers visiting subject specific parts of the site rather than our broader applications, UCAS and clearing forum. And I understand from talking to many of you that this aligns with your other activities where subject specific terms are outperforming brand on Google. Students really want that granular detail that will allow them to make the most informed choice that they can. And this will continue to be really important as we come into the clearing period, which is likely to be busier than usual this year. Point 3, offering flexibility in where, when and how they can study may be of interest. So this cohort have had to get used to independent learning a lot earlier in their education, which may be a real positive when it comes to adjusting to the more independent nature of university study. So this cohort have been held back in some ways in terms of their confidence, their mental health and their resilience, but been given a bit of a head start on the independent learning, more so than a typical pre-COVID undergrad who might not have had and might not have been used to such independence before their first term at uni. So communicate whether and what allowances will be made. This is point 4, regarding work experience and entry requirements in light of COVID. One thing that we've learned with our work last academic year with the 2020 cohort was that it was the uncertainty and lack of information that was the most challenging. Point 5, my general lack of confidence and motivation among this cohort. So it's really hard to hear some students say things like, they just don't feel capable, they're making different choices because they just don't feel like they're good enough. So, how can you help build this back up? What kind of supportive language can you use in your marketing? What inspirational stories can you share with them? What will get them excited about their studies, and in particular, their studies at your institution? And then point 6 there, perhaps most important of all, just be aware that they're watching how universities are dealing with current students at the moment. And this is impacting where they're considering their choice of study. So reputation is everything. So are there questions on your forum on TSR from prospective applicants that are going unanswered? For those of you with an official rep on site, do they need any support or training to engage with students at this time? Is the cascade of information on open days, COVID safety, changes to restrictions, course details, is that getting to the official reps so they can pass that on to potential applicants properly? So just don't be afraid to over communicate, because students are really struggling to get the information that they need. And finally, before we move to any questions, we'll continue to research this audience. So if there are any topics that you think we should be including in the research, please just let us know. If you'd like access to the full reports from each stage of the research, then just get in touch with me afterwards and we can share that with you. I can see some questions have come into the Q&A. Not clicked on them yet to have a look. Oh, and even more are popping in as I'm speaking. So there are some questions, which is great. Okay, Babs, do you want to pick some up? There's quite a few interesting ones here. Shall I hand over to you?
Yeah, sure. So one person has asked, of the 19% that were more interested in moving away, do we know how many were in London? Are you wanting to move away from city centres? That's not something I've got in front of me at the minute, but I'll get back to you with that. I'll look into. I will be able to look into that and get back to you on that one. I'm just having a look at the other questions. Do they have a preference for in-person or virtual this summer? I think we may have answered that already, but yeah, it looks like ideally both potentially for this audience. And as Vic mentioned, that's going to be a challenge in terms of making interesting content for 2 different events. Again, interesting to see how students are researching universities, and unsurprisingly, virtual open days are high in the list, to say whether other things have gone up or down as a result of COVID. Again, that's not something I've looked at so far, but we do have research from sort of 2019, our options research that predated the navigating changing options research, so I can look into that and see whether there were changes. Obviously, online sources obviously have had to go up, and we've seen a decline in the amount of support that they're able to get in terms of that careers advice from teachers and the achievers and things as well. I can certainly look into those numbers and compare them to what we got in the 2019 results and get back to you on that one. I had a question around value for money. I don't think it's something we asked in this survey, but it's potentially something that we can include in a future way if we're doing something. The next one's planned in for June, so I can potentially include a question around value for money in the June wave of the research. Sorry, just reading some of these.
There's a question here around, so with under 25s unlikely to be vaccinated anytime soon, and taking into account their presence as student helpers and ambassadors, as well as visitors at campus-based events, is it advisable to have campus events where we could potentially be putting a lot of young people at risk? So on that one, only in line with restrictions and only where it's safe and logistical to do so. So yeah, I think if you can do them, then what we're seeing in terms of the research is that students want to, they want to go and see universities where they can. But clearly, in line with COVID restrictions, so that everybody is staying safe.
Someone's mentioned BTEC students. Yeah, I did mention A-level students. We do, I was using those for ease in terms of the tariff points when I mentioned like the ABBs to AAA tariff points. But yes, we do include BTEC students in the research. And I think when we looked at it, we didn't notice any obvious differences in BTEC students with A-level students, but I can go back and have a look and see if there's anything there and get back to you on that one. Into whether there's any impact on student decision to take courses including study abroad. So we haven't asked about study abroad because when we've been doing these surveys, it hasn't been something that's feasible. I think as restrictions allow, it is something that we will add to future surveys because there's definitely an interest. We've seen a couple of questions about whether students are more interested or more likely to study abroad. So it's not something that was necessarily relevant while we're all locked down to include in the surveys, but we can put that in future waves.
So question here from Joe Etchells. Can you provide some figures in relation to your assertion that a high proportion of TSL site visitors are visiting subject-specific pages? Yes, definitely, Joe. So I'll follow up with you after and I can send some of that information to you.
There's a question here about are we seeing any changes in patterns or demand for specific themes or degree type? In terms of subjects, I've not seen, we haven't seen any changes, or I've not seen any changes. In terms of the survey results, I didn't see anything on that. I did look into that and didn't see anything. So it wasn't that any particular subject group was more likely to be changing their university plans or their subject plans. Yeah, so I can get back to so Celine, you've asked how many of the participants are interested in Russell Group universities. That's something that I can look into and get back to you on. Wellbeing will be high on the agenda this year in terms of additional support from the university. Yes, I completely agree. I think it will be important, and it's just to reiterate what we said, motivation is very low, confidence is very low. These young people will need support, and also they're very used to being much more involved in their own family support networks where they have those. So yes, their support networks will be very different this year, and then going to university again, that I think wellbeing will very much be high on the agenda. On the slide with sources, on the slide with sources for the research, would face-to-face open days normally come above UCAS and Google, whereas that's the same order to a normal year? I'll look into that. I think in terms of resources, yeah, the UCAS and Google are always fairly high. I think obviously face-to-face open days would be higher, but I can't remember off the top of my head whether they would be higher than those online sources. Okay, change the
An interesting question there from Keir Robinson, Bab. So any differences in responses across the 4 nations?
None that we spotted, none that we noticed in the research when we looked at the analysis. We tend to flag anything. So what we do in the reports is we look at all the different profiling characteristics, and if we see a difference, we will flag it. And I don't recall seeing any particular differences across the 4 nations. And someone has asked about the flexibility. So is there any data on what this means in terms of studying at home or at uni? Do they want to be able to spend some days at uni and then some days at home to get true flexibility? Again, that's not something that we've included. That was something. So the question where we added about the future to explore about what they want to take on from lockdown into the future isn't something that we had included in the research before this most recent wave. So it was quite a nice surprise for us to actually see that they do want to continue with the flexibility to work and study at home if they can. So that's something we will explore in a future wave of research, certainly. So where are these students asked how they would feel attending UCAS first and being in large crowds? Do they want to meet lots of universities at once, or do they feel nervous, etc.? Again, that's not something that we've asked yet, although 60% did say that they wanted to attend face-to-face open days. ideally that's something that they're looking forward to in the future. But the question was worded so that it was, once the vaccine rollout has been has happened. So it's possibly something that we will explore more in the June research. Is that, so what do they see? How do they see universities opening up and UCAS fairs and so on opening up? How do they want to take this forward with COVID?
An interesting question there from Geraldine as well, Barbara. So do you have anything on what types of online engagement with universities they found useful? Are they happy with video talks, or are they looking for interactive activities?
I think it's a bit of both from what we've seen. So a lot of the comments were that, well, there was a slide that they wanted to be able to interact with lecturers as they would at a normal open day. They want to be able to interact with students as they would at their current students on their course, as they would at a normal open day. But also they actually do want the ability to dip in and out of sessions, and the ability to access the content on demand. So it's a bit of, they want a bit of everything, and fair enough. So I think, yeah, as much flexibility as you can give on that would certainly be welcomed.
There's a question there from David Handy. Hi, David. Would it be possible to ask whether students feel comfortable attending large face-to-face exhibitions September to November? It would be useful to know as we work on our plans with partners this autumn. So similar question to the what about UCAS fairs? So yeah, as Barbara sort of answered, wasn't asked in this wave of research, but maybe we could look to ask something more specific around bigger fairs and events for the next wave.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it sounds like from these questions that we're getting, and please do get in touch with me if you've got any other themes or questions that you'd like to include in the future wave of the survey. But it certainly looks that sort of moving how they see the future unfolding and what they'd be happy and willing to participate in going forward certainly seems like a real interesting theme to include in the next wave of research. Yeah, and we'll ask if they're willing to get the vaccine before coming. That sounds like a good thing to add. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, really great to see not only so many of you register, so many of you attend, but also so many of you asked some really great questions there as well. So really appreciate the level of participation this morning. So thank you so much for that. I feel like unless we've missed anything, we've answered pretty much most of those questions. Perhaps is there anything else that you're seeing that you want to pick up in this session?
I think there's a question in the chat about whether it was weighted. No, the data isn't weighted. So yeah, no, we haven't. But yes, I can share some more details with you as well afterwards. Yeah, I think that's it. Virtual open days are poorly attended in especially comparison to campus ones. Are there ideas to improve attendance? It's a tricky one, isn't it? I think anything that you can do to make it more, to make it like the real thing. And I know that's the challenge, isn't it? It's those, think about what those aspects, those really special key aspects of what a face-to-face open day are. And it is the course information, and it's meeting the lecturers, meeting the students, being able to picture yourself there as a student there, and also don't forget that the experience that they'll have at an online open day could well reflect the experience they're going to have in their online learning as well. So it's making sure that it reflects it well, provide those taster sessions so they can see what a course talk would be like, what it's going to be, whether it's going to inspire them, whether it's going to make them want to join that university. And it is tricky, and it is a balance, but anything you can do to help them picture their lives as a student at that university will go a long way, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Barbara. There's a couple of questions in the chat about access to the report afterwards as well, so I'll pick up with Rahul and Rochelle afterwards, and we can get those findings shared with you. And this webinar is recorded as well, and I think that will be shared via email. So the email that you signed up to register with, it should just be sent to there afterwards, so you can listen to us all over again if you want to. Brilliant. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Yeah, on behalf of myself, Barbara, and everybody at the Student Room for joining us today and for being really, really good at participating and joining in. So yeah, I'll say goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.